The morning sun painted golden streaks across the polished windows of Elegance Avenue, casting a warm glow over the mannequins dressed in designer clothes. For Michelle Anderson, this view never got old. Standing across the street from her boutique, she took a moment to soak it all in, just like she did every morning before opening hours. 10 years ago, she had been standing in this exact spot, but back then, she was just another hopeful dreamer with a notebook full of sketches and a heart full of determination. Working 2 jobs, one as a retail associate during the day and another as a restaurant server at night, she had pinched and saved every penny, turning down countless invitations for dinners and shopping trips with friends. One day, she would tell herself during those exhausting double shifts, one day this will all be worth it. Her friends thought she was crazy when she decided to put her entire savings into a business loan application. Her mom had nervously suggested looking for a more stable career path, but Michelle had always seen something special in this particular storefront, even when it was just a run-down shop selling discount clothing. The journey hadn't been easy. She remembered countless nights spent hunched over spreadsheets at her tiny apartment kitchen table, calculating and recalculating numbers until her eyes burned. YouTube became her best friend as she taught herself about business plans, inventory management, and social media marketing. Her small apartment slowly transformed into a makeshift office, with mood boards covering every wall and fabric samples scattered across every surface. What made her story different was her approach to building Elegance Avenue. While other boutiques in the area focused solely on luxury, Michelle wanted to create something more meaningful. She handpicked every piece in her store, ensuring each item told a story. She knew what it felt like to press your nose against a store window, dreaming of owning something beautiful but feeling unwelcome inside. She vowed her store would be different. Getting the keys to the store had been just the beginning. Michelle spent weeks personally renovating the space, learning how to paint and install fixtures from online tutorials. She transformed the old fluorescent-lit space into a warm, welcoming boutique with soft lighting and comfortable seating areas. Every detail, from the artisanal coffee served to customers to the locally made artwork on the walls, was chosen to make people feel at home. The boutique's success hadn't happened overnight. The first year was a roller coaster of emotions, days of excitement when a new customer discovered the store, followed by nights of worry when sales were slow. Michelle learned to celebrate small victories. The first time a customer brought a friend back to the store, the first 5-star review, the first day they exceeded their sales target. Now, 5 years later, Elegance Avenue had become one of the most successful boutiques in the city. Fashion magazines featured their window displays, and their Instagram account had a loyal following. But success brought its own challenges. As the business grew, Michelle found herself spending more time managing operations from her home office, dealing with suppliers, planning seasonal collections, and overseeing the store's expansion plans. She hired staff to handle day-to-day operations, carefully selecting people who she thought shared her vision for the store. The latest addition was a new day manager who came highly recommended from another luxury retailer. On paper, he seemed perfect, experienced, professional, and well-spoken. Michelle had conducted the final interview virtually, as she often did now with her busy schedule. That morning, standing outside her store, Michelle felt a mixture of pride and nostalgia. The store windows now displayed designer labels that she once could only dream of carrying. The interior had been recently renovated to include a VIP lounge area for private shopping appointments. But she missed the hands-on involvement of the early days. She made a mental note to start doing more surprise visits during regular business hours. While she trusted her team, she believed in staying connected to the day-to-day reality of her business. After all, it was the little details, the way customers were greeted, how the merchandise was displayed, the overall shopping experience that had made Elegance Avenue special in the first place. Little did Michelle know that her next surprise visit would turn into one of the most challenging moments of her career, testing not just her patience, but also shining a spotlight on issues that went far beyond the walls of her beloved boutique. But for now, she smiled, adjusted her blazer, and headed to her home office, ready to tackle another day of running the business she had built from the ground up. The morning traffic hummed in the background as she walked away, the store's windows reflecting the promise of another busy day. Inside, the staff was preparing for opening, straightening clothes racks and adjusting displays, unaware that their world was about to change in ways none of them could have predicted. Robert Thompson straightened his designer tie for the third time that morning, studying his reflection in the store's pristine windows. He had been the day manager at Elegance Avenue for exactly 2 months now, and he took immense pride in what he called maintaining standards. His previous position at another high-end retailer had taught him what he believed was the proper way to run an exclusive boutique. The morning sun was just beginning to warm the polished marble floors as he conducted his daily inspection. Everything had to be perfect. Clothing spaced exactly 2 inches apart on the racks, shoes aligned with military precision, and display cases gleaming without a single fingerprint in sight. But lately, something had been bothering him more than slightly misaligned hangers or imperfect window displays. "These aren't the kind of customers we should be attracting," he muttered to himself, watching through the window as people passed by on the sidewalk. In his mind, he had a very specific image of what an Elegance Avenue customer should look like, and he had made it his personal mission to protect what he called the store's exclusive atmosphere. The young staff members had noticed changes since Robert took over. The warm, welcoming environment that had made Elegance Avenue famous began to shift. Gone were the comfortable seating areas where customers could relax and chat with friends while trying on clothes. They encouraged loitering, Robert had declared, replacing the plush chairs with stark, minimalist benches that nobody wanted to sit on for more than a few minutes. He implemented what he called enhanced security measures, though nobody had complained about security issues before. Security cameras that once simply monitored the store for safety now swiveled to follow certain customers as they browsed. The friendly security guard who used to greet everyone with a smile was replaced by someone who looked like they belonged outside a nightclub, complete with an earpiece and stern expression. Robert's day typically started with a staff meeting where he would lecture about maintaining the store's image. The sales associates, once known for their genuine friendliness, became nervous and rigid under his watching eye. They had seen how he would hover near certain customers, following them around the store with poorly disguised suspicion. Remember, he would say in his daily briefings, "We need to be selective about who we serve." The way he emphasized the word selective made several staff members uncomfortable, but they needed their jobs. A few had tried to raise concerns through email to the owner, but with Michelle working primarily from home, these messages seemed to get lost in the daily flood of business communications. The regular customers began to notice changes too. Mrs. Chen, who had been shopping at Elegance Avenue since it opened and always brought her friends from the local Chinese community, stopped coming in after Robert had loudly questioned the authenticity of her designer handbag. The group of college students who would save up for months to buy special occasion dresses no longer felt comfortable browsing after being told multiple times that just looking wasn't encouraged. One particularly telling incident occurred when Dr. Johnson, a prominent local pediatrician, came in wearing scrubs after her hospital shift. Robert had immediately approached her, saying, "The clearance store is 3 blocks down." When other staff members tried to intervene, explaining that Dr. Johnson was one of their best customers, Robert had simply walked away without apologizing, later reprimanding the staff for undermining his authority. The store's once active social media presence began to show signs of the change. The comments section, previously filled with customers sharing their positive experiences, now featured increasing questions about why certain posts were being deleted and why customer service seemed to have changed so dramatically. Robert kept detailed notes about what he considered suspicious behavior, which to him included such innocent actions as customers examining garment details or taking photos of price tags to think about purchases. He had developed a habit of calling the local security company for the slightest perceived issue, proudly maintaining that he was keeping the riffraff out. What Robert didn't realize was that his actions were not going unnoticed in the broader community. Local social media groups had started discussing the change in atmosphere at Elegance Avenue. Several longtime customers had begun taking their business elsewhere, though Robert interpreted the declining foot traffic as a sign that his higher standards were working. The irony of the situation was completely lost on him, that his actions were actually driving away the very kind of successful, fashion-conscious customers the store had always catered to. His narrow view of what a proper customer should look like was slowly but surely undoing years of community goodwill that Michelle had carefully built. As the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, Robert adjusted his tie one final time and prepared to open the store for another day. He had no idea that his carefully constructed world of prejudice and presumption was about to come crashing down around him in a way he never could have anticipated. The stage was set for a confrontation that would not only challenge his worldview, but would also spark a conversation that would reach far beyond the walls of Elegance Avenue. The Saturday afternoon sun streamed through the boutique's windows, casting long shadows across racks of designer clothing. It was the kind of perfect autumn day that usually brought in plenty of shoppers, and Elegance Avenue was bustling with weekend customers. Michelle had chosen this busy time deliberately for her surprise visit, wanting to see how her store operated during peak hours. She pulled into the back parking lot in her everyday car rather than the luxury vehicle she used for business meetings. Today, she wore her comfortable weekend outfit, well-worn jeans, a simple sweater, and her favorite sneakers. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she carried her trusty tablet in a canvas tote bag. After months of mainly working from home, she was excited to spend time in her beloved store. Time to see how things are really running, she mumbled to herself, tucking her tablet under her arm. She had been getting some concerning emails from longtime customers about changes in the store's atmosphere, but between managing supplier relationships and planning the upcoming seasonal collection, she hadn't had time to investigate properly. The bell chimed softly as she entered through the side door, blending in with the Saturday afternoon crowd. Immediately, she noticed changes. The warm, inviting atmosphere she had carefully cultivated felt different. The comfortable seating areas were gone, replaced by stark, uninviting benches. The friendly security guard who had worked there for years was replaced by someone who looked more suited to a nightclub than a boutique. As she moved through the store, Michelle pulled out her tablet and began making notes. She photographed the new layout, documented the changed displays, and observed the staff interactions with customers. Something felt off about the way the sales associates were behaving, their usual warmth replaced by a nervous rigidity. She overheard a young sales associate apologizing to a customer. "I'm sorry, but the manager insists we can't hold items anymore, even for our regular customers." Michelle frowned, adding another note to her growing list. This was definitely not the policy she had established. As she examined a rack of designer dresses, she noticed a shadow falling across the clothing. Looking up, she found Robert hovering nearby, his eyes fixed on her hands as she touched the expensive fabrics. She moved to another section. He followed. She checked price tags. He cleared his throat loudly. She took photos of a new display. His shoes squeaked against the floor as he moved closer. "Can I help you?" His voice carried a sharp edge that Michelle had never heard from any of her employees before. She smiled, continuing to make notes on her tablet. "Just looking, thank you." "I couldn't help but notice you've been taking pictures," he said, moving to block her path to the next display. "Photography isn't allowed in the store." Michelle raised an eyebrow. Another new policy she hadn't approved. "Actually, I'm doing some work," she explained calmly, turning her tablet to show him her notes. "I'm evaluating the store layout and—" "Work?" He cut her off with a dismissive laugh. "I don't think so. I know everyone who works here, and you definitely don't." His eyes swept over her casual outfit with obvious disapproval. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Several customers had stopped browsing to watch the interaction. Michelle noticed phones being pulled out, some already recording. She took a deep breath, maintaining her professional composure. "There seems to be a misunderstanding." "I'm actually—" "The only misunderstanding," Robert interrupted again, his voice getting louder, "is you thinking you can come in here and case our merchandise. I've seen your type before, taking pictures of our security layout, planning to come back later." A small crowd had gathered now. Michelle could see her longtime sales associates in the background, their faces a mix of confusion and growing recognition as they looked more closely at her. One of them, Lisa, who had been with the store since opening day, started moving forward with wide eyes, finally realizing who was being confronted. "Sir," Michelle tried one more time, her voice firm but calm. "I understand you're trying to do your job, but you're making some very serious assumptions here." "The only assumption," he said, pulling out his phone, "is that you thought you could get away with this." "I'm calling the police, and you're not leaving until they arrive." He moved to stand in front of the nearest exit, his hand raised as if to physically prevent her from leaving. Michelle could have ended the situation immediately by revealing her identity, but something made her pause. This was a side of her store she needed to see, needed to understand. As she heard Robert speaking to the police, describing her as a suspicious person and emphasizing certain words in a way that made his prejudices clear, she took out her own phone and sent a quick text to her assistant. The air in the store was thick with tension. Customers whispered among themselves, phones still recording. Sales associates stood frozen, those who recognized her looking increasingly distressed. And Robert stood by the door, a triumphant smile playing at the corners of his mouth, completely unaware that he was about to learn a very public lesson about the dangers of assumptions. The tension in Elegance Avenue had reached a boiling point. The afternoon sun cast dramatic shadows through the store windows, highlighting the crowd of customers who had formed a loose circle around Michelle and Robert. The gentle music playing through the store's speakers seemed jarringly out of place against the backdrop of confrontation. "Ma'am, I've notified the authorities," Robert announced loudly, his chest puffed out with self-importance. "They're on their way to deal with your suspicious behavior." He kept one hand on his phone while using the other to gesture dramatically at Michelle's tablet. "Taking photos of our security setup, examining expensive merchandise, clearly casing the store for a future theft." Michelle remained remarkably calm, her years of business experience evident in her measured response. "Sir, I understand you're concerned, but you're making assumptions that could have serious consequences." She glanced around at the growing number of phones recording the incident. "I suggest you think very carefully about your next actions." A whisper rippled through the crowd as several long-time customers began to recognize her. Mrs. Thompson, who had been shopping at Elegance Avenue since opening day, gasped audibly. "Oh my goodness," she murmured to her companion, "that's the owner." Robert either didn't hear or chose to ignore the murmurs. His face had taken on a reddish tinge as he continued his accusations. "Don't try to talk your way out of this. I've worked in luxury retail for 15 years. I know exactly what to look for, and you," he paused for emphasis, looking pointedly at her casual outfit, "don't belong here." The store's atmosphere had transformed completely. The usually peaceful Saturday afternoon shopping experience had given way to uncomfortable tension. Regular customers exchanged worried glances, while newer shoppers stood frozen, unsure whether to stay or leave. The sales associates, particularly those who had worked there longest, looked increasingly distressed. Lisa, the veteran sales associate, finally found her courage. "Mr. Thompson, I really think you should." "Not now, Lisa," Robert snapped, cutting her off. "I'm handling this situation." He turned back to Michelle, his voice dripping with condescension. "The police will be here any minute. I suggest you hand over your tablet and phone to prevent you from deleting any evidence." Michelle raised an eyebrow, her composure unshaken. "Are you attempting to confiscate my personal property?" She made a quick note on her tablet. "That's interesting. Please, continue explaining your actions. This is all very informative." Her calm demeanor seemed to further agitate Robert. "Stop taking notes," he demanded, taking a step toward her. "This isn't some game. You can't just walk in here, wearing those clothes, acting suspicious, and expect us to believe you're doing legitimate business." The sound of the store's front door chiming cut through the tension. 2 police officers entered, their expressions shifting from alert to confused as they took in the scene. Instead of finding an active theft or disturbance, they saw a calm woman in casual clothes being confronted by an increasingly agitated man in a suit. "This is her, officers," Robert called out, his voice echoing through the now silent store. "I caught her suspicious behavior on our security cameras. She's been taking photos, examining our merchandise too closely, clearly planning something criminal." The first officer approached cautiously, taking in the scene. "Ma'am, could you please explain what you're doing here?" Before Michelle could respond, the store's side door burst open. A professional-looking woman in a blazer rushed in, slightly out of breath. "Michelle, I got your text. Is everything okay?" She stopped short, taking in the scene before her. "Oh my goodness, what is happening here?" The color began to drain from Robert's face as he looked between Michelle and the newcomer. Who are you?" The woman drew herself up to her full height, her voice clear and professional. I'm Amanda Porter, executive assistant to Michelle Anderson, the owner and CEO of Elegance Avenue. The woman you've been harassing and threatening to arrest? That's my boss. The woman who signs your paychecks. The woman who built this store from nothing. The silence that followed was deafening. The only sound was the gentle hum of the air conditioning and the soft click of foam still recording. Robert's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. The police officers exchanged glances, their postures relaxing as understanding dawned. Michelle finally broke the silence, her voice calm but carrying an edge of steel. Well, Robert, since you're so interested in what I'm doing here, let me explain. I came to investigate some concerning reports about changes in our store's atmosphere. I'd say this afternoon has been very, she paused, looking meaningfully at the phone's still recording, illuminating. The implications of what had just happened began to sink in. Regular customers shook their heads in disbelief, some wiping away tears. The sales associates who had been too afraid to speak up earlier now stood straighter, relief evident on their faces. And Robert, the man who had been so confident in his judgment just moments before, looked as though his entire world had crumbled beneath his feet. The story could have ended there, with a simple firing and a public apology. But what happened next would transform this moment of confrontation into something much more significant, a catalyst for change that would ripple far beyond the walls of Elegance Avenue. The color began to drain from Robert's face as he looked between Michelle and the newcomer. Who are you? The woman drew herself up to her full height, her voice clear and professional. I'm Amanda Porter, executive assistant to Michelle Anderson, the owner and CEO of Elegance Avenue. The woman you've been harassing and threatening to arrest? That's my boss. The woman who signs your paychecks. The woman who built this store from nothing. The silence that followed was deafening. The only sound was the gentle hum of the air conditioning and the soft click of phones still recording. Robert's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. The police officers exchanged glances, their postures relaxing as understanding dawned. Michelle finally broke the silence, her voice calm but carrying an edge of steel. Well, Robert, since you're so interested in what I'm doing here, let me explain. I came to investigate some concerning reports about changes in our store's atmosphere. I'd say this afternoon has been very, she paused, looking meaningfully at the phone still recording, illuminating. The implications of what had just happened began to sink in. Regular customers shook their heads in disbelief, some wiping away tears. The sales associates who had been too afraid to speak up earlier now stood straighter, relief evident on their faces. And Robert, the man who had been so confident in his judgment just moments before, looked as though his entire world had crumbled beneath his feet. The story could have ended there, with a simple firing and a public apology. But what happened next would transform this moment of confrontation into something much more significant, a catalyst for change that would ripple far beyond the walls of Elegance Avenue. The next few minutes in Elegance Avenue unfolded like a scene from a movie, but with very real consequences. The afternoon sunlight continued to stream through the store's windows, now illuminating a very different tableau from the confrontation moments before. The silence that had fallen over the store was broken only by the gentle hum of the air conditioning and the occasional whisper from the crowd of onlookers. Amanda Porter, Michelle's executive assistant, had positioned herself protectively near her boss, tablet in hand, already documenting everything. The two police officers, who had arrived expecting to handle a potential theft, now stood awkwardly to the side, their body language showing clear discomfort with the situation they had walked into. Officers, Michelle spoke first, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone used to commanding boardrooms. I appreciate you responding so quickly to this call. However, as you can see, there's been a significant misunderstanding. She gestured around the store. I'm the owner of this establishment, and I was conducting a routine quality check when my manager here decided I looked suspicious. The older of the two officers nodded slowly, removing his hat. Ma'am, we apologize for any inconvenience. Perhaps we should discuss this in your office. He shot a pointed look at the crowd of customers still recording on their phones. Robert stood frozen, his face having gone from red to pale in a matter of seconds. The hand that had been so confidently holding his phone now trembled slightly as he lowered it. I didn't know, he stammered, his earlier arrogance evaporating. The owner I interviewed with, it was a video call. I never. Never what, Robert? Michelle's voice was calm but firm. Never thought the owner of this store could look like me. Never imagined that someone in casual clothes could be here legitimately. Or never considered that your assumptions about people might be wrong. The younger police officer, who had been checking something on his phone, suddenly looked up with wide eyes. Wait, this is *that Elegance Avenue? The one that was featured in Business Monthly for its community integration programs. He turned to his partner, speaking in a low voice. Their owner is known for running one of the most successful retail mentorship programs in the city. Lisa, the longtime sales associate, stepped forward. Her hands were clasped tightly together, but her voice was steady. Mrs. Anderson, I'm so sorry none of us spoke up sooner. Things have been different since Mr. Thompson took over. The comfortable chairs disappeared, the security cameras started following certain customers, our regular clients stopped coming in. Other staff members began nodding, their silence finally broken. One by one, they started sharing their experiences, how they'd been instructed to watch certain customers more closely, how they'd been reprimanded for being too friendly with people Robert deemed unsuitable, how the warm, welcoming atmosphere of the store had slowly turned cold and unwelcoming. Mrs. Thompson, the longtime customer who had recognized Michelle earlier, stepped forward from the crowd. I've been shopping here since this store opened, she announced, her voice quavering slightly with emotion. I watched Michelle transform this place from a small boutique into something special. It wasn't just about the clothes, it was about how everyone was treated with respect. Until recently. She turned to Robert, her expression a mixture of disappointment and anger. Young man, you've done more damage to this store's reputation in 2 months than any shoplifter could have done in years. The truth of those words seemed to hit Robert like a physical blow. He looked around the store, really seeing for the first time the faces of the people he had affected, the hurt expressions of the staff, the angry looks from longtime customers, the disappointed headshakes from the officers who had responded to his call. Amanda, who had been quietly typing on her tablet, looked up. Michelle, the video of this incident is already spreading on social media. We've got calls coming in from 3 different news outlets, and our mention tracker is going crazy. Michelle nodded, taking this information in stride. She turned to address the crowd of customers who were still watching the scene unfold. I want to thank you all for being here today. What's happened here is unfortunate, but it's also an opportunity. An opportunity to show what happens when we confront prejudice. An opportunity to demonstrate how we handle mistakes. And most importantly, an opportunity to do better. She turned back to Robert, who seemed to have aged years in the past few minutes. We'll need your keys and store access cards. Amanda will escort you to clean out your office. Her voice was professional, without a hint of the anger she must have felt. I suggest you use this experience to reflect on the assumptions that led us here. As Amanda led a shell-shocked Robert toward his office, Michelle addressed the police officers. Gentlemen, thank you for your time today. I think we can handle things from here. The officers nodded, clearly relieved to be able to exit what had become a very public scene. The story could have ended there, with a manager's prejudices exposed and a simple firing. But Michelle Anderson hadn't built her success by taking the easy path. As she watched Robert being escorted out, she was already forming plans for how to turn this unfortunate incident into something positive, something that could create lasting change not just in her store, but in the broader retail community. By Sunday morning, the incident at Elegance Avenue had exploded across social media. The videos, captured from multiple angles by customers, told a story that resonated far beyond the boutique's walls. The hashtag Elegance Avenue incident was trending, with millions of views and shares across various platforms. Amanda's phone hadn't stopped buzzing since dawn. She sat in Michelle's home office, scrolling through an endless stream of notifications. The first video hit 2 million views overnight, she reported, rubbing her tired eyes. Every major news outlet wants an interview. Local stations have crews parked outside the store. Michelle stood by her window, coffee cup in hand, watching the morning light paint the sky in soft colors. How are people responding? She asked, though she'd been up most of the night reading comments herself. It's overwhelming, Amanda replied, scrolling through her tablet. The business community is showing massive support. 3 major retail associations have reached out about speaking engagements, but the most powerful responses are coming from people sharing their own similar experiences. The comments sections under the videos had become a forum for people to share their stories of facing prejudice while shopping. Store workers were coming forward with accounts of being pressured to profile customers. The conversation had grown far beyond one incident in one store. It had touched a nerve that resonated with thousands. "Look at this one," Amanda said, turning her tablet around. A woman in Chicago wrote about how she's a neurosurgeon but still gets followed around in high-end stores. Her post has 50,000 shares already. Michelle set down her coffee cup and moved to her desk. "What about our regular customers?" Amanda's expression softened. "They're rallying behind us. Mrs. Thompson's video statement about the store's history and your leadership has gone viral too. People are calling her the Elegance Avenue grandmother online." She paused, checking another notification. "The local business association wants to organize a community support day." The store's social media accounts, usually filled with fashion updates and style tips, had transformed overnight into a platform for important conversations. Every post about the incident received thousands of responses. People weren't just angry about what had happened, they were ready for change. Around noon, Michelle's personal phone rang. It was Lisa, the senior sales associate. "Mrs. Anderson, you need to see this." Her voice wavered with emotion. "People are gathering outside the store, but it's not what you think. They're showing support." Michelle and Amanda arrived at Elegance Avenue 30 minutes later. The scene brought tears to their eyes. Dozens of people stood outside, holding handmade signs with messages of support. Local business owners had come out to stand in solidarity. Regular customers mingled with newcomers, sharing stories and hugs. One sign particularly caught Michelle's attention. "This is what real ownership looks like, leading with grace and dignity." The elderly woman holding it had tears in her eyes as she waved to Michelle. Inside the store, the staff had transformed their shock from yesterday into determination. They'd created a welcome table near the entrance, offering water and cookies to visitors. The stark benches Robert had installed were already gone, replaced by some of the original comfortable seating pulled from storage. The story continued to spread throughout the day. Social media influencers picked it up, adding their own experiences and calls for change. Business schools contacted Michelle about using the incident as a case study in ethical leadership and crisis management. Civil rights organizations reached out to discuss collaboration opportunities. But it wasn't just the viral attention that made the story powerful. It was the quiet moments. The young black girl who came in with her mother, pointing at Michelle's photo on the wall and saying, "Look, Mom, she owns this whole store." The elderly gentleman who shared how he'd been saving up to buy his wife a special anniversary gift but had been too intimidated to come in before. The local business student who asked if she could interview Michelle for her thesis on breaking barriers in retail. By evening, the hashtag had evolved from hashtag Elegance Avenue Incident to hashtag Elegance Avenue Movement. People weren't just talking about what had happened, they were discussing what needed to change in retail environments everywhere. The conversation had shifted from anger about discrimination to hope for transformation. Amanda found Michelle in her office late that night, surrounded by notes and plans. "What are you working on?" she asked, setting down a fresh cup of coffee. Michelle looked up, her eyes bright with purpose. "This isn't just about one incident or one store anymore," she said, gesturing to her notes. "We have a platform now, a chance to make real change, and I'm going to make sure we use it right." She pointed to a draft document on her screen titled Retail Equality Initiative. It outlined plans for industry-wide training programs, mentorship opportunities for minority business owners, and guidelines for creating truly inclusive shopping environments. "Tomorrow," Michelle continued, "we start turning this incident into something positive. But first," she smiled, picking up her phone, "I need to call Mrs. Thompson and thank her for that amazing speech. Sometimes your strongest allies come from unexpected places." The sun had long since set, but the lights in Elegance Avenue's office still burned bright. What had started as a horrible incident was transforming into something powerful, a movement for change that would ripple through the retail industry and beyond. And it all began because one woman decided to check on her store wearing jeans and sneakers on a Saturday afternoon. 6 months after the incident that shook Elegance Avenue, the store had transformed into something even more special than before. The morning sun still painted golden streaks across the polished windows, but now those windows displayed something new: photos and stories celebrating the diverse community that made the boutique special. Inside, the changes were even more striking. The comfortable seating areas had returned, now arranged in cozy conversation nooks where customers could relax and chat. The walls featured artwork from local artists of all backgrounds, each piece telling its own story of identity and belonging. Michelle stood in the center of her store, watching the morning staff meeting. The team had grown, now including faces from all walks of life. The new store manager, Patricia Chen, was reviewing the day's schedule, which included a mentorship session for young entrepreneurs and a community fashion showcase. "Remember," Patricia said warmly to the gathered staff, "our success isn't just measured in sales. It's measured in the moments we create, the connections we build, and the way we make every single person feel when they walk through those doors." The store's transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had taken careful planning, dedication, and most importantly, a willingness to learn from past mistakes. The Retail Equality Initiative that Michelle had drafted in the aftermath of the incident had grown into a comprehensive program that was now being adopted by stores across the country. Amanda walked in, tablet in hand as usual, but now she was accompanied by a group of young retail management trainees. The store had become a training ground for the next generation of retail leaders, teaching them not just about fashion and sales, but about creating truly inclusive spaces. "And this," Amanda was saying to the group, "is where we host our weekly community meetings. Last week, we had a fascinating discussion about making luxury retail more accessible and welcoming to everyone." The story of what happened that Saturday afternoon hadn't faded away. Instead, it had become a powerful teaching tool. The security footage and customer videos, once symbols of confrontation, were now used in training sessions across the retail industry to show how unconscious bias could surface in unexpected ways. Even Robert had become part of the story's resolution, though not in the way anyone expected. 3 months after the incident, he had reached out to Michelle through her lawyer. His letter, humble and honest, spoke of deep reflection and a desire to make amends. "I spent these months really looking at myself," he had written. "At first, I was angry and defensive. But watching those videos over and over, seeing myself through others' eyes, it changed something in me. I'd like to share my story if you think it could help prevent others from making the same mistakes." Michelle had taken a risk and invited him to speak at one of their training sessions. His testimony about confronting his own prejudices and working to change had become a powerful part of their program. It wasn't about forgiveness or redemption. It was about showing that real change was possible when people were willing to acknowledge their mistakes and do the hard work of growing. The store's social media presence had evolved too. Instead of just showcasing products, they now shared stories of their diverse customer community. The #EleganceAvenue movement hashtag had grown into a platform for sharing positive changes in retail spaces everywhere. One wall of the store now featured a Community Heroes gallery showcasing customers who made a difference in their own ways. There was Dr. Thompson, who worked extra shifts at the hospital to help uninsured patients. Mr. Chen, who taught free ESL classes at the local library. Mrs. Davis, who organized food drives for the homeless shelter. The boutique's success had only grown, but the metrics of success had changed. Yes, sales were strong, but Michelle now measured achievement differently. She looked at the number of mentorship programs completed, the diversity of their customer base, the feedback from community members who finally felt welcomed in a luxury space. On this particular morning, Michelle watched a young woman walk into the store, hesitant at first, just like she herself had been all those years ago when dreaming of owning her own boutique. A staff member immediately approached her with a warm smile, and Michelle could see the woman's shoulders relax. "That's what it's all about," Michelle said softly to herself. "Creating spaces where everyone can feel like they belong." Later that afternoon, during their monthly community feedback session, an elderly gentleman stood up to speak. "I've been in retail for 40 years, he said, his voice thick with emotion. "What you've done here, It's changing not just your store, but how we think about shopping, about service, about treating each other. You've shown us that luxury isn't just about expensive things, it's about dignity, respect, and making everyone feel valued. As the sun set on another busy day at Elegance Avenue, Michelle sat in her office, looking through photos from the past 6 months. Each image told the story of transformation, not just of her store, but of an industry slowly learning to examine its prejudices and change for the better. The incident that could have destroyed her business had instead sparked a movement. It had shown that one person's courage to stand up, to face prejudice with dignity, and to turn a negative experience into positive change could ripple out far beyond the walls of one boutique. "Ready for tomorrow's leadership seminar?" Amanda asked, poking her head into the office. Michelle smiled, gathering her notes. Tomorrow, she would be speaking to a group of retail executives about creating inclusive spaces. But her most powerful teaching tool wasn't in her notes or presentations. It was the living example of Elegance Avenue itself, a space where fashion, community, and social change had come together to create something truly beautiful. "You know what, Amanda?" Michelle said, standing up. "I think we're ready for whatever comes next."